Wanted to say how much I love the theme, and I'm sure everybody feels that way. And actually, last night I spent the evening doing some conscious maintenance and repair of a relationship, actually, that's very important to me. And I woke up feeling quite tired and like I didn't really want to be presenting on a panel, but then I remembered the theme and it felt very aligned. So I'm going to be talking about my organization and work, Moral Imaginations. And I've got about 20 slides. I think I've got 20 minutes to talk through.
Brilliant.
So what I quite like to start my presentations with is this question. So when was the last time you nourished your imagination? Maybe just give you a second for the people in the Zoom room with us, if you want to put anything into the chat, either when that was or what that looked like. When was the last time you intentionally and consciously nourished and fed your imagination? Laura, today. Yeah, so we've got people reading books, lovely. What I quite like to ask as a second question, which usually gets a lot fewer responses, is when was the last time you nourished your imagination at work? Because that's something that, I'm being called in at the moment to speak with a lot of organizations about imagination and the importance of imagination. And organizations, people, CEOs, when I'm talking to them, are kind of having these wake-up moments of, wow, we never make space for imagination. We never kind of consciously make space for that. And so a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment is working with people who have the ability to embed structures and policies and infrastructure into either their organizations or their communities or their networks around how to embed imagination and what we call imagination activism, which I'll talk a bit more about as we go. So very happy to be here. I really loved the tagline of this festival, especially the part at the end talking about tending the things that matter. And I started Moral Imaginations technically 2 years ago, but even in the year before that, I was really grappling with this question. I'd spent the last 6 years working in governance and decision-making and in organizational design, because I was interested in why we're not making decisions that put the earth and people and future generations at the core. I just couldn't get my head around this. I'd started as a scientist working in molecular biology, and I've always been very purpose-driven from a young age. Like I've always felt like I need to spend my life and my work working towards making a more flourishing planet and world for everybody. And I started life between the arts and sciences, but very quickly got really influenced by our society, that actually, doing an art degree would be a bit of a waste of time, and I can always maintain my art passion. And so I used to do a lot of painting and drawing, which I'm now bringing back into my life, because actually it's really hard to maintain things that are not embedded in kind of structure and practice and ritual. And so I went down the path of science and technology, had a big kind of reckoning with how actually we have all the science and technology we need to create the kind of world that we all envision and wish for. And so then I had this big kind of question mark, or like this terra incognita, like this area of like unknown, of like, okay, if we've got all the science and technology we need, what is it that is stopping us from tending the things that matter? What is it? Like it really perplexed me. And I looked up, I made like a big list of all of the master's courses and PhDs that I could do in like ethics and like learning about ethics and philosophy. But in the end, it's a longer story, but I became quite obsessed with imagination and the power of perception, and drawing on my neuroscience background, started doing a lot of research around how our perceptions of the world influence what we value and what we find important. I'm going to skip forward and skip back actually, because I wanted to just rest on this slide, because this is a picture of me meeting Joanna Macy in 2016 out in California. So it was actually the day after I left my academic position at Imperial College London. I took a flight to California to spend 10 days with Joanna Macy doing a training in a body of work called The Work That Reconnects. And this training had a huge influence on me and really opened up my eyes. And her whole life and work has been about creating practices and exercises that reconnect people to life. And so I often have her book nearby. This is, the blurring will, oh, there we go. I put it right next to my face, it should work. It's called Coming Back to Life. I really recommend people have a look at that book. So her work has really influenced my life and really opened a portal to the power of working with group methodologies, exercises. And the question I was left asking as I started to discover these very powerful practices that shift perception was, how can we maintain the perception shifts that occur when we go through exercises like the exercises I experienced in California? And I started to devise my own exercises and my own ideas around a personal theory of change, which is now what is encapsulated in Moral Imaginations. And so Moral Imaginations, we call ourselves a research and practice center, committed to creating deep systems change. So deep systems change being not just systems change that changes the systems, but actually changes our perception and our values and reorients ourselves and our society towards the things that really matter. And it's taken a long time to really get so succinct about that. And at the beginning of Moral Imaginations, our mission statement was just connecting people to the things that really matter. And it felt very vague. And we have worked with these 3 pillars since starting as an organization. So first pillar being future generations, second pillar being the more than human world, and radical interspecies kinship. So really building that perception that non-human beings are alive, sentient, conscious, have a whole world, in them. And it's so interesting once you start to notice, you see a bird on your walk to work, and there are different ways of looking at a bird. You could look at a bird and just think bird, noun, object, thing, or you look at a bird and think conscious being, connection, aliveness, mystery. And there's such a difference in how both it feels to be alive when you're looking at the world in that way, but also how you act. So this theme of perception being action, which is really a core part of somebody called Nora Bateson's work. Perception is action is really key to how we operate in Moral Imaginations. And the final pillar is ancestors, because I really, really believe that one of the biggest sicknesses of Western neoliberal modern society is the total cutting off of people and their ancestors, and a sense of what has come before, and a sense of life having purpose, not because we have to come up with a purpose in this lifetime. What is there's a huge pressure, I feel, on the individual to come up with a meaningful life and a purpose. Whereas, when we were perhaps in many generations ago more connected with our ancestors, that purpose is something that exists outside of just ourselves. It's in our lineage, it's in our relationships, it's in our history. And I also think that by this cutting off from our ancestors, there's also an ability to shirk responsibility. And obviously these are not new ideas. There's the whole movement around reparations and the kinds of actions that are happening finally in places like New Zealand, even just the legal personhood of the Wanganui River, which kind of brings in all 3 pillars, because this is also a big part of our origin story. I was in New Zealand in 2017 when the Wanganui River was given legal personhood. And what that means is that it's also a kind of coming together of the iwi, which is the Maori word for tribe, that lives and tends and stewards the Wanganui River, and the Crown government. And actually now the river is represented in the legal system by one member of the iwi from the Wanganui iwi and one member from the Crown. So it's also, doing that reparation work of ancestors, and that work to bring legal personhood to the river came from the Maori people who had been campaigning for this to happen for about 100 years. citing the fact that the crown has depleted the river, polluted the river, destroyed the ecology, and actually the river is a person and a being, and there needs to be a reparation of that relationship. I just wanted to check in on time. When am I finishing this? Is it in 5 minutes?
No, you have a little longer. Let me just check the actual finish time.
Thank you.
I think you should be, I realize we haven't actually divided them up by speaker, but we started a little early, so I think you are good to go for at least another 10 minutes.
Fab. Good stuff.
15.
Bro. Just give me a wave when I've got a couple minutes left, maybe. So we have been working with these 6 exercises over the last 2-3 years. During the pandemic, we ran like so many back-to-back workshops and webinars on Zoom. The power of Zoom is that, you can actually fit in like 3 workshops into a day, whereas actually usually, you do 1 workshop in person and you're kind of exhausted for days afterwards. So we ran a huge number of sessions getting feedback on these exercises, and we counted that it was over 1,000 people went through our processes just during that first year of the pandemic, which was both such a difficult and scary time, and also so filled with hope, which, I think some of that hope has also been misplaced. And so that's actually some of what comes out in the first exercise, the Impossible Train Story, which is an exercise that I created in April 2020, in that first month of the pandemic when things were really intense. And essentially the gist of it, I can put a link in the chat because there's a video that we created with an artist who is part of the Moral Imagining Collective called Riley Dow. And the essential gist of the story is that there's a world where people have been living on this train that's been moving since the beginning of time. And I've now watched Snowpiercer, so I actually realized that there's like a whole blockbuster film about this, which was quite weird to watch afterwards. So people have been living on this train since the beginning of time, and the conditions on the train are really awful. People don't have enough to eat, people are very unhappy, but there's this just constant kind of going and progress and rushing sensation. And one day there's a fire on one of the carriages of the train, and the train has to stop, and the brakes that nobody knew existed come into action, and the train stops, and people get off the train, and as they get off they start to kind of hear birdsong for the first time, and see the kind of plants and nature, and kind of rediscover who they are and what they're all about. And then a huge conversation starts to happen amongst the people, and they're asking, should we start the train again? Should we rip up the railway? Should we build a new rail that takes us somewhere else? And so we developed this into an immersive imagination exercise that people kind of experience this as if they are on this train, and then we have the conversation and use different methodologies like role play and theatre and narrative work and collective storytelling to help people make sense of the pandemic. And it was a very emotive exercise and brought up a lot for people, because I think for some of us during the pandemic, we did see the glimpse of the different world that's possible, the simpler way of coming back to, helping each other out, the mutual aid groups, and that huge wave of the kind of self-organizing mutual aid groups that happened, and how much actually technology, if used well, can unleash this kind of self-organizing kindness, but then how much actually snapped back into the old way of doing things. So that's the Impossible Train Story. The symbiosis meditation is part of the More Than Human pillar. So it's all about helping people blur the boundaries between their human self and the more than human world, and really draws upon, so my background is a microbiologist, so I studied bacteria, and part of what made me leave my science career and go and start teaching at Schumacher College, which is the first thing I did when I left, was this realization that we're having all of this new biology come out. And at the time I was thinking it's kind of like postmodern biology, because modern biology is all, based on Charles Darwin's survival of the fittest, this sense of competition, species boundaries. And so there's this new biology coming out that I was studying around the microbiome and Lynn Margulis's work and symbiosis. And yet our cultures haven't caught up with that way of seeing the world. And so I developed this meditation. It's 8 minutes long. And it helps people basically tune in to all of the life that has basically given rise to them coming into being, and all of the life that actually is part of who they are as a human being, because actually we're majority bacterial cells. So that's the second one. The third one is the Interspecies Council, and I was going to share some pictures with you from this summer. We've delivered this workshop in a lot of different contexts, sometimes in professional workplaces and boardrooms. This is an example of where the Interspecies Council was hosted at Boom Festival in Portugal. So you'll see a lot of barely clad, sweaty humans just clambering around, and we called it the Intergalactic Council. And it was glorious. It was, we had 60 people show up, and for 2 hours they each were guided through a process of connecting to a more than human being, and practiced different. They get a chance to practice the different species that they are embodying, and we work a lot with humor as well, because it can be quite uncomfortable for people to explore this way of being and seeing. And then we sit in council and discuss, the state of the world at the moment and the things that are befalling all of the creatures that show up at the council. So we had the dolphin, the beetle, and I think we had dark matter as well, which was very interesting. So all sorts comes out. And then the final 3 exercises all work with future generations work. These are the exercises that I'm working with most at the moment, and work with, especially with organizations, to help them start thinking about a much longer timescale and build a responsibility towards the future generations. So we've got 7th generation exercise, which I've also facilitated with 4,000 people in a concert hall in Sweden. So just to give you a sense of the scale that this is possible. So, everything from a solo exercise to a small group to a very big group. So I've got a few more slides on imagination activism, because this is a new concept that we're working with and really excited about, and now starting to work with local councils to build imagination activism and build that capacity. And I feel like our work with local councils is really relevant to the theme of this festival, of the maintaining, of the repairing. And, a lot of the people in the program, the Imagination Activism program we've put together, are people working on the front line in housing, in repairs, in libraries, child social care, adult social care. They're the people who are doing that maintenance work, and who don't usually get a chance to do this radical imagining of a different kind of world. So it's we're helping the people who are maintaining all of the services that help local communities maintain their imagination. So that feels very, very, just feels like really important work to be doing. And I'd love to see more of it. So the idea of the imagination activist is that we know what kind of activists look like traditionally. There's a traditional sort of stereotype when you think of an activist, somebody who's shouting about how bad things are, holding up cardboard signs like this one here, "Stop denying the earth is dying." It's about stopping, it's about calling out what's wrong, what's not working, using the tools of guilt and shame and kind of righteousness, which is very, very valid. And we need that kind of activism for sure. And it's also the kind of activist I used to be when I was working in the fossil fuel divestment campaign, and being a climate activist as well. And I still identify as a climate activist. And Greta Thunberg and Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion, it's got a role to play in the ecology, and it's a very necessary one. But the point that we are trying to make with this campaign and kind of meme is that we also need to recognize and nourish and fuel a different kind of activism, which is an activism which uses the tools of imagination, of vision, of collective kind of inspiration, and actually getting people to, rather than feel guilty about the things they're not doing, actually get inspired about how good things could be and how things could be more like the kind of world they would like to see as well. And I think there's something really a lot more equitable about this kind of activism, because I think it's a great privilege to be able to recycle, eat organic, do all of the things that are kind of the right way of living right now. Like for me, it's missing some context around the pressures and the financial pressures that exist, and how, when we're living in a society where systemically, a wasteful, polluting, and unsustainable way of living is the one that is not just maintained, but also made. It's the default, and it's the one that is most subsidized. So to be, to respond to someone like Greta and kind of live that new world takes some level of education, privilege, and a bunch of other factors. And so what I really like about imagination is that, for me, imagination is a massive equalizer, because you don't need to have a better education to imagine better. So we always, in all of our programs, everybody can contribute to visions of the future and to an imagined world. You don't have to have a Cambridge degree or, a background in science to participate and have your valid voice and space in collective imagining. So an imagination activist is an activist powered by imagination and the vision, and equipped with the tools to make the world better for everybody. And so what this boils down to when we're running this new training program is we're helping and supporting people expand their own imaginations around what the world could be like, and kind of expanding what's possible, but then also learning some tools and practices to help inspire other people around them to make the impossible possible. So it's both the imagination of ourselves, but then also helping seed more of that imagining elsewhere. And I'll just finish by talking just for a couple of minutes about the work we're doing right now with Camden, which launched this week, which is really exciting. It's been 6 months in the making. And so we have designed an 8-week program that's training 32 imagination activists in Camden. And so they're being trained they're both having an experience of the imagination exercises I talked about. And actually those experiences are designed to open up in a kind of neuroscience and brain sense, like open up people's imagination, open up creativity, reconnect people to their sense of empowerment to imagine. But then they're also learning the tools and practices to host imagination within Camden. And at the end of this 8-week program, we're launching an imagination fund within Camden for the 32 imagination activists to be able to use to fund their projects to build imagination activism in Camden. So it's a kind of movement building model, because there are 4,000 people working in Camden, 4,000 council officers, but we are not training the 4,000. So right now we're training a smaller group, but equipping them to go and ripple this out and share their learnings with the rest of the 4,000. And we, as a kind of another output of this course, is that we're engaging a group of kind of supporters and like an outer ring of council officers at Camden to start designing ways that we could embed imagination into Camden. So one of the ideas that we're working with at the moment is the idea of having protected time within working hours for imagination. So, and we're blogging about this as it goes. We've got a blog which is on Medium, and it's called Camden Imagines. I think it's medium.com/Camden_Imagines. And we've also got a Camden Imagines Instagram page. So if you'd like to kind of stay in the loop and watch this journey as it unfolds, please, follow along in those links. This was the question that inspired and seeded the Camden Imagines programme and the work that we're doing with Camden, which is what if Camden could be the most imaginative borough in the UK, just as a way to kind of expand the thinking around the possibility there. I think I have spoken enough. I could do like another minute. There's definitely more to say if there's more time, but I've given you a nice overview.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. That was absolutely perfect on timing. Why don't we save that extra minute and first hear from Liz, and then we can come back in our discussion section, perhaps hear a little bit more then. That was awesome. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who's been posting relevant links in the chat.